Imagine a world where the ground beneath your feet suddenly shifts, where the sky darkens without warning, and where the creatures around you transform into something unrecognizable. This might sound like a scene from a science fiction movie, but for a long time, this was how people understood the history of the Earth. Welcome to the world of early naturalists, where the boundaries between myth and science were often blurred, and the quest for understanding the natural world was as much a journey of imagination as it was of observation. In the 18th century, two towering figures in the field of natural history, Carl Linnaeus and Georges-Louis Leclerc, Comte de Buffon, had very different views on the nature of species and the history of the Earth. Their contrasting perspectives not only shaped the scientific community of their time, but also influenced how we understand the natural world today. Carl Linnaeus, a Swedish botanist and zoologist, is often credited as the father of modern taxonomy. He introduced a system for classifying living organisms that is still used today, though it has been significantly refined. Linnaeus believed in the fixity of species, a concept rooted in his deep religious faith. He argued that each species was created by God in its current form, and that these forms had remained unchanged since the beginning of time. This idea was not just a scientific belief, but a theological one. Linnaeus saw his work as a way to catalog God's creation, and his famous aphorism, "We can count as many species now as were created in the beginning," reflects this conviction. Linnaeus' system, known as binomial nomenclature, involved giving each species a two-part name, a genus name and a species name. For example, the common house cat is Felis catus. This system made it easier for scientists to communicate about different species and help standardize the naming of plants and animals. However, Linnaeus' rigid belief in the fixity of species meant that he was initially resistant to the idea that new species could arise, or that existing ones could change over time. As more and more species were discovered by Linnaeus' disciples, he began to entertain the possibility that not all species had been created in their current form. He suggested that new species could arise through the combination of different species, a process he called hybridization. This was a significant departure from his earlier beliefs, but it also opened up a Pandora's box of possibilities. If species could change, what did that mean for the idea of a fixed, unchanging creation? On the other side of the scientific spectrum was Georges-Louis Leclerc, Comte de Buffon, a French naturalist and aristocrat. Buffon's approach to natural history was vastly different from Linnaeus. Born into a wealthy family, Buffon received a broad education and pursued interests in law, medicine, botany, and mathematics. He became the superintendent of the Royal Botanical Gardens in Paris, and spent his life studying and writing about the natural world. Buffon was a champion of empirical observation and a critic of rigid classification systems. He believed that nature was dynamic and constantly changing, and he was skeptical of the idea that species were fixed and unchanging. Buffon's work, particularly his massive 36-volume Histoire naturelle, emphasized the importance of describing and understanding the natural world in its complexity. He rejected the notion that a simple classification system could capture the richness and diversity of life. Buffon's approach to natural history was also more accessible to the general public. He wrote in French rather than Latin, and his lyrical prose made his work popular among both scientists and laypeople. His descriptions of animals and their behaviors were often vivid and engaging, making complex scientific ideas more relatable and understandable. One of Buffon's most significant contributions was his emphasis on the history of nature. He argued that the Earth and its inhabitants had a long and complex history, and that this history could be understood through careful observation and experimentation. Buffon was particularly interested in the idea of species transformation, and the possibility that new species could arise over time. This was a radical idea at the time, as it challenged the prevailing belief in the fixity of species. Buffon's work also touched on the concept of extinction, the idea that species could disappear from the Earth. This was a controversial idea, as it suggested that the world was not static, but was subject to change and loss. Buffon's acceptance of the possibility of extinction and species transformation laid the groundwork for later evolutionary theories. The contrast between Linnaeus and Buffon was not just a matter of scientific methodology, but also reflected their different worldviews. Linnaeus saw the natural world as a fixed, ordered creation, while Buffon saw it as a dynamic, ever-changing system. These differing perspectives had significant implications for how they approached the study of nature and how they understood the history of the Earth. Linnaeus' belief in the fixity of species aligned with the prevailing religious and philosophical views of his time. The idea that the Earth and its inhabitants had been created in a fixed state and had remained unchanged was deeply rooted in Christian theology. This belief was reinforced by the work of scholars like James Ussher, an Irish prelate who calculated the date of the creation as October 26, 4004 B.C. Ussher's chronology, which was widely accepted, suggested that the Earth was only a few thousand years old, a timeline that was far too short for significant changes to occur. The belief in a young Earth and the fixity of species also influenced the field of geology. Many naturalists of the time believed in catastrophism, the idea that the Earth's surface had been shaped by sudden, dramatic events rather than gradual processes. This view was based on the assumption that the Earth was too young for slow, natural processes to have produced the complex and varied landforms observed today. Catastrophism suggested that events like floods, earthquakes, and volcanic eruptions were responsible for the dramatic changes in the Earth's surface. However, Buffon's emphasis on the history of nature and the possibility of gradual change began to challenge these ideas. He argued that the Earth's surface had been shaped by a combination of sudden events and gradual processes over a much longer period of time. This idea, known as uniformitarianism, suggested that the same natural processes that operate today have been operating throughout Earth's history. Uniformitarianism laid the foundation for modern geology and the understanding that the Earth is much older than previously thought. The debate between Linnaeus and Buffon, and between catastrophism and uniformitarianism, reflects the broader scientific and philosophical shifts of the 18th century. The Enlightenment, a period of intellectual and cultural transformation, encouraged a more empirical and rational approach to understanding the natural world. Naturalists like Buffon and later scientists like Charles Lyell and Charles Darwin built on the idea that the Earth and its inhabitants had a long and complex history, and that this history could be understood through careful observation and experimentation. Today, we know that the Earth is billions of years old, and that species have evolved over time through a process of natural selection. The work of Linnaeus and Buffon, though rooted in very different perspectives, contributed to the development of modern biology and geology. Linnaeus' system of classification provided a framework for organizing and understanding the diversity of life, while Buffon's emphasis on the history and complexity of nature laid the groundwork for the study of evolution and the age of the Earth. In the end, the contrast between Linnaeus and Buffon serves as a reminder that science is not just about facts and figures, but also about the way we view the world. Their different approaches to natural history reflect the ongoing tension between order and change, between the desire for certainty and the acceptance of complexity. This tension continues to drive scientific inquiry and our understanding of the natural world. So, the next time you look at the world around you, remember that the ground beneath your feet and the creatures that inhabit it are the result of a long and fascinating history. Whether you see the world as a fixed, ordered creation or a dynamic, ever-changing system, the journey of discovery continues, and the story of the Earth and its inhabitants is far from over.